The morning sun crept slowly over the quiet mountain village, touching the rooftops with a soft light that felt gentler than a mood that hung over it. The air here was always cool, even in warmer months, and carried the faint scent of pine and river water. To most people, this place seemed peaceful, but to Alara, it was a landscape heavy with things she tried not to remember. She walked through the narrow dirt path that led from her small cabin to the village center. People knew her by name, yet she kept enough distance that no one tried too hard to get close. She carried herself like someone half awake, moving through the world without fully meeting it. The villagers noticed her quietness, but rarely spoke of it. They sensed the weight she carried, though no one dared ask her about it. The river ran along the edge of the village like a long, silver scar. It twisted past the trees and the rocks with a soft, endless murmur. People said the river held memories. Some called it cursed, others called it haunted. But everyone agreed that strange things happened near its waters, and Alara stayed far away from it. She avoided the river the way someone avoids an old wound. Just the sound of rushing water made her heart tighten. She kept her eyes forward when she passed near it, refusing to let her mind drift toward the shadows lurking in her past. She didn't want to remember. She didn't want to feel anything that might loosen the numbness she had built inside herself like a shield. But something had shifted lately. Each day, the distance she kept from the river seemed harder to maintain. The numbness was growing thinner, as if whatever she had buried long ago was beginning to stir again. And somewhere deep inside her, she sensed that the river was waiting for her return. That night, sleep refused to settle on Alara. She twisted under the thin blanket, her mind filling with blurry shapes and muffled sounds that she couldn't hold onto long enough to understand. It wasn't quite dreaming, but not quite waking either. It felt like someone tapping her shoulder with a memory she wasn't ready to see. When she finally sat up, her chest felt tight, like she had been running in her sleep. The night was still and cold, and the air inside her cabin tasted heavy. For a long moment, she stared at the window, where moonlight shone through the thin curtains. The river's faint whisper drifted in with the wind. She didn't know how she could hear it from so far away, but she did. It felt like it was calling her. She tried to shake the feeling off, but it only grew stronger. A strange pull tugged at her chest, quiet but steady, guiding her toward the river she had avoided for years. Before she realized what she was doing, she had slipped in her boots, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped into the night. The village slept deeply. The path to the river was darker than usual, covered in shadows that stretched long and thin across the ground. As she walked, the whispering grew clearer, though she still couldn't understand the words. It was like hearing a voice underwater, soft, muffled, and distant. When she reached the riverbank, the air around her seemed to shift. The water was unusually still, reflecting the moon like a glass surface. For a moment, she hesitated, wanting to turn around and run back home. But something inside her held her in place. She stepped closer until she could see her reflection. Her face stared back at her, pale and tired, eyes slightly hollow. But then, in the span of a heartbeat, her reflection flickered, just for a second, almost like a candle flame pushed by an unseen breeze. The movement wasn't hers. Her breath caught. She stepped back, but the flicker replayed itself in her mind. It was too quick to fully understand, yet enough to shake her. It left a cold feeling running through her arms, as if the river had reached out and touched her skin. Something old and buried churned within her chest. Memories she had pushed down began to rise like fog, vague but unsettling. She wasn't ready for them. Not yet, but the river didn't seem to care about what she was ready for. As she stood there, the water's whisper grew even softer, curling into her ears like a secret. She couldn't make out the words, but she felt the meaning pressing close. The river wanted her to remember. The next evening brought a storm. Gray clouds rolled in over the mountains, and the wind scraped against rooftops like restless fingers. Rain hit the ground in fast, heavy drops. Most villagers hurried indoors, shutting windows and bolting doors. But Alara found herself outside once again, drawn toward the river with a feeling that was stronger than fear. She didn't know why she moved through the storm, only that something inside her demanded answers she had spent years avoiding. Thunder echoed as she reached the river's edge. The water rushed harder than the night before, its surface rippling under the pounding rain. The trees around her swayed with sharp, angry motions, their branches bending low as if trying to warn her. Still, she stepped closer. Her reflection appeared on the dark surface of the river, dim but visible. She didn't expect to see anything unusual again. She told herself the flicker from a night before had been her imagination, a trick of the moonlight, a tired mind seeing shadows in the wrong place. But then her reflection lifted its hand to its face, though Alara's own hands hadn't moved at all. Tears streamed down the reflection's cheeks, mixing with the rain. The sight hit Alara like a punch. Her breath vanished from her lungs. The crying was silent, but the pain in the reflection's expression was unmistakable, raw, deep, and full of grief that felt too familiar. The most terrifying part was that the reflection didn't look like her. Not exactly. It looked younger, softer, like a version of her from before everything changed, before the tragedy. Her mind raced, spinning with fear and confusion. She wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She couldn't pull her gaze away from the reflection. Each tear that fell into the water made the river's surface ripple outward, as if the reflection's emotions were shaping the current. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She felt guilt rising like a dark tide, wrapping itself around her throat. She didn't know why her reflection was crying, but deep inside, she sensed the answer had been waiting for her for years. Lightning lit up the sky, and for a split second, she saw something even more alarming. The reflection opened its mouth. No sound came from it, but the water around Alara vibrated softly. She heard something in the rush of the river. Her name, whispered so quietly she thought she imagined it. But she didn't imagine the feeling that followed. A sudden pull deep inside her, like the river was trying to reach into her memories. Her hands trembled. Fear clawed at her stomach. She wanted to step back, but curiosity held her in place. The reflection cried harder, its shoulders shaking silently. Its eyes held a pain that mirrored Alara's own, a pain she had closed off long ago. The storm roared around her, but the world felt strangely quiet, as if everything was waiting for her next move. The reflection's lips formed a single word she couldn't fully hear through the sound of the rushing river. But she felt it, felt the meaning of it settle cold and heavy in her chest. It wanted her to face the truth. And deep down, she knew the truth was buried someplace she had spent years trying to forget. Alara stumbled away from the riverbank, her heart thudding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The storm had soaked her through, but she barely noticed. Her mind was too loud, filled with questions she didn't want to face. She wrapped her arms around herself as she walked back toward the village, trying to fight the trembling that ran through her body. That night, she barely slept. Whenever her eyes shut, she saw her younger reflection again, those crying eyes, that silent mouth calling her name. She woke several times, gasping for air, unsure whether she had dreamed the scene or relived it. The next morning, her hands shook when she tried to hold a cup of water. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts. Something inside her felt like it was breaking apart. She tried to convince herself she was simply tired, overwhelmed, imagining things. But the shakiness in her chest told her otherwise. By midday, whispers floated around the village. A few neighbors watched her with worried eyes as she walked past the bakery, moving slowly, as if each step took effort. They murmured to each other after she passed. She sensed their worry, or perhaps their fear. Everyone knew the river wasn't just a normal place. Children were told stories to keep them from wandering near it. Elders warned that the water carried memories like a shadow carried light, always attached, even when ignored. Some villagers believed the river reflected not just faces, but the truth people tried to hide. When Alara visited the market, the old healer, Mira, paused from arranging herbs and spoke gently, her voice low. She told Alara to stay away from the river, especially during storms. Her eyes held something like pity, but also something like fear. She didn't explain why. She didn't need to. People didn't talk openly about what the river remembered. The more they spoke around her, the more Alara felt a growing pressure in her mind. It was like a dam holding back water, and now cracks were forming. Night brought no rest. She woke trembling, with flashes of memories rushing through her like bursts of lightning. Shouts, rushing water, a small hand, a scream that seemed to echo inside her ears. She pressed her hands to her head as if she could force the memories back down. But the river had stirred something she could no longer bury. By the third day, the numbness she had lived with for so long began to crumble, replaced by a rising ache she didn't know how to bear. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something dark and deep, and the only way forward was down. Finally, exhausted from running from herself, she made a choice. She would go back to the river, not to turn away this time, but to understand why her own reflection was crying, and maybe to understand why she had been avoiding her memories for so many years. The river was quiet when Alara returned. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean sky and a soft mist that settled low over the water. The stillness felt heavy, as if the river itself was waiting. She stood by the bank, staring into the calm surface. At first, her reflection looked normal, just her own face, tired and pale. But when she leaned closer, something inside her shifted. A flash of memory rose so suddenly that she staggered back. A child's laugh, light footsteps running through grass, a voice she had not heard in years. Era. The name floated through her mind like a whisper from another life. She pressed her hand against her chest as the memory grew brighter. She saw two girls, herself as a child, and Era, small and bright-eyed, always clinging to Alara's arm. They were running toward the river, giggling, fearless. The water had been calm that day. Beautiful. Era had loved throwing little stones into it, watching the ripples spread. Alara felt the warmth of those moments, then the sharp sting of sorrow as the memory faded. Her legs trembled. She sank onto the damp ground, gripping the grass, trying to steady herself. She had spent years building walls around these memories, locking them away so they wouldn't hurt her. But now the river was pulling each one out, like threads unraveling from a tangled cloth. She closed her eyes. Another memory surfaced, not peaceful this time. Dark clouds gathering, wind pushing against them, Era slipping on wet rocks near the river's edge. Alara's hands reaching for her, but grabbing only air. The small body disappearing beneath the water. The scream that clawed out of Alara's throat. She gasped and opened her eyes. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Tears filled her vision, blurring the river. Her reflection trembled in the water, shifting from her current self to the younger version she had seen before. The crying version. The version that looked like the girl she used to be, just before everything shattered. Alara felt her stomach twist as guilt rushed through her, hot and overwhelming. She had been the one watching Era. She had been the older sister. She had promised to keep Era safe. And she had failed. At least, that was the story she had told herself all these years. The villagers had said it was an accident. Her parents had tried to comfort her. But Alara had stopped listening. She had shut everyone out. She had punished herself by holding onto the guilt like a chain around her heart. Now, seeing her reflection, the crying younger version of herself, made her realize something she had never admitted. She hadn't only been grieving Era. She had been grieving the version of herself she lost that day, too. The child who laughed freely. The girl who trusted the world. The sister who believed she could protect the one she loved most. A sob escaped her. She pressed her hands to her face as years of silence cracked open. She didn't stop the tears this time. She let them fall into the river like broken pieces returning to where they came from. As she cried, the reflections in the water shifted again, not frightening, but gentle. The younger version of her looked up with sad eyes, as if waiting for Alara to finally see what she had ignored for years. It wasn't only Era's memory that haunted her. It was her own shame, and now that shame had surfaced, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Alara understood then that the river wasn't trying to punish her. It was trying to show her the truth she had buried so deeply that she had forgotten how to feel anything at all. The river had become the place where her guilt lived, and now it wanted her to face it. A gentle breeze moved across the river as Alara lifted her head. Her reflection stared back at her, no longer distorted, but strangely alive. The younger version of herself blinked slowly, as if waking up from a long sleep. Her mouth began to move, shaping silent words that Alara couldn't hear, but could somehow feel. The reflection wasn't just a mirror image anymore. It was something separate, something that had carried the emotions Alara refused to touch. The reflection's expression softened. Its eyes shifted between sadness and pleading, as if asking her to listen. Alara leaned closer, her breath unsteady. Though no sound came from the reflection's lips, she felt the meaning settle in her mind like a quiet echo. Remember, don't run. The reflection lifted a trembling hand, showing raw sorrow, not only for the drowning, but for the years that followed. The years when Alara shut down, when she stopped talking, when she stopped feeling, when she let grief grow into a shadow that followed her everywhere. Alara's throat tightened. She wanted to reach out, but the water was cold and distant. She watched helplessly as her reflection began to shift again. The younger version faded, replaced by another image, herself at different ages. Each version looked more broken than the last. The Alara who refused to forgive herself. The Alara who wouldn't let her parents comfort her. The Alara who grew older, but not lighter. It was like watching the pieces of her own soul drift apart. A strange fear crawled into her chest. Was this the truth she had been avoiding? That she had become a stranger to herself? Her reflection steadied again, finally showing her current face, but even this reflection looked different. It was as if the reflection carried the emotions she hid deep within her. It mouthed more words. Slower, clearer, remember fully. Alara felt something inside her shatter. She understood now why the river had called her, why the reflection had cried, why the memories were coming back. The river was not a curse. It was a mirror for the emotions she had buried so deeply that she forgot what it meant to be whole. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. She didn't know if the reflection was a haunting, a memory brought to life, or simply a broken piece of herself trying to return home. But she knew it wanted her to face what she had avoided for so long. Her reflection began to change one final time, its face melting into a mix of past and present, sorrow and fear, like all her versions merging into one cry for truth. Alara took a shaky breath. She was ready to face the night that had destroyed her life. Alara returned to the river under a sky heavy with clouds. It wasn't storming yet, but the air felt thick, as if the night was holding its breath. Her footsteps were slow and steady as she walked along the familiar path, the trees whispering around her in soft movements. She knew why she had come. She needed to see everything clearly, every moment she had tried to erase. The river had shown her pieces, but now it wanted her to face the whole truth. The moon slipped behind the clouds, leaving the world washed in gray. Alara stepped to the edge of the river. The water rippled gently, reflecting her face in shaky lines. She closed her eyes and let the memories rise. At first, she heard laughter, her own voice, bright and carefree. Era's giggles, ringing like little bells. They ran along the riverbank, the sky still blue and warm. Alara could almost feel her younger hand holding Era's tiny one. Then the memory darkened. Clouds rolled in fast. The wind grew sharp. Alara heard herself say something, though she couldn't make out the words, before Era darted toward the edge to grab a pretty stone. The rock under her slipped. Era fell. Alara felt it, as if it were happening now. Her chest tightened, panic flooding her. She reached out again and again, just like she had back then, trying to grab her sister's hand. The memory replayed with painful clarity. Era's small fingers brushing hers, but missing, the water swallowing her completely. A scream tore through the air, a younger Alara's scream, full of terror and disbelief. Alara watched herself jump into the water, thrashing desperately. but the current had already shifted from a storm surge, pulling Era deeper. Alara watched the scene unfold helplessly, each second stabbed like a blade. She had convinced herself that she hadn't done enough, that she should have been faster, should have held tighter, should have saved her. But as the memory replayed again, something new appeared, something her mind had erased. The river had surged without warning. A powerful wave rolled through, dragging everything with it. Even if Alara had grabbed Era's hand, the wave would have taken her too. The accident wasn't caused by carelessness or a mistake. It was the storm. It was nature. It was something no child could have stopped. Alara's breath hitched. She watched her younger self cry out for help, her voice cracking from the cold water. She saw her try again and again until someone from the village pulled her back to shore. The memory hurt, but it also revealed the truth she had refused to see. She hadn't failed Era. She had tried with everything she had. The guilt she had carried for years trembled inside her, loosening its grip. As the memory faded, Alara opened her eyes. Her reflection appeared again, but this time, the younger version wasn't crying. Tears still clung to its cheeks, but they stopped falling. The reflection's face softened, no longer twisted by pain. For a moment, the reflection looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and love, like a younger sister might. Then the reflection's final tears slid down and dropped into the river. The water rippled gently, taking the tears with it. Alara felt her chest swell, the grief rising fully for the first time in years. Not the sharp, punishing kind, but a deep, aching sadness that felt strangely cleansing. She sank to her knees and let herself mourn. Really mourn. For Era. For her younger self. For all the years she spent trapped in silence. The river didn't whisper this time. It simply carried the moment in its steady flow, as if accepting the truth along with her. The air grew calmer as Alara stayed by the riverbank, breathing slowly. Something inside her felt different, like a tight knot had finally loosened after years of being pulled too hard. The night no longer felt threatening. Instead, it felt open, almost gentle. She looked into the river again. Her reflection returned to normal. No younger versions. No crying faces. Just her, Alara, staring back with tired eyes but a clearer expression. For a long time, she simply looked at herself. She saw the woman she had become, shaped by grief and fear, but still standing. She saw the traces of the girl she once was, hidden under years of silence. And she felt a quiet connection forming, like two halves slowly weaving together. She closed her eyes and let her thoughts move inward. She didn't speak aloud, but inside her mind, she reached out to the younger Alara who had blamed herself. She reached out to the girl who had lost her sister and then lost herself too. She offered forgiveness, not in words, but in warmth. She allowed herself to feel compassion for the child she once was, for the teenager who withdrew from everyone, for the young woman who carried guilt like a weight she believed she deserved. Slowly, her breathing steadied. A calm filled the space where guilt once lived. When she opened her eyes again, her reflection was still there, but it felt whole. Its gaze no longer looked past her or through her. It matched her movements naturally, the way a reflection should. The river also seemed transformed. Though the water still moved steadily, it no longer felt like a place of fear. The shadows drifting across the surface no longer seemed like hidden memories trying to break free. Instead, the river looked peaceful, like a place where truth had finally settled. The pain was still there, but it was quieter, softer, something she could hold without breaking. Alara stood, brushing dirt and grass from her palms. Her body felt lighter, as if the burden she had carried for so long had finally lifted off her shoulders. The river no longer demanded anything from her. It simply flowed, carrying away the sorrow she had held within herself for years. The next morning was bright and clear, the sky washed in soft blues and golds. Alara walked through the village with a small bundle of flowers in her hands, wildflowers she had picked from meadow. Their colors were gentle, pale purple, white, and soft yellow. Villagers watched her as she passed. Their expressions changed, some surprised, some relieved, some simply curious. They had grown used to seeing Ilera move through life like a shadow. But today, she walked with a calm steadiness they hadn't seen in years. She reached the riverbank and stood quietly for a moment. The water glimmered under the morning sun, rippling gently against the stones. This time, she didn't feel fear. She felt a deep, steady peace. She knelt and placed the flowers at the edge of the water. The petals touched the surface, then drifted slowly along the current. She watched them go, letting the moment land softly in her heart. It wasn't a goodbye to Era. It was a release, a way of saying she would no longer let guilt define her. She would remember her sister with love instead of pain. As she rose, she noticed a few villagers nearby. Some nodded quietly. Others simply met her eyes with recognition. They didn't need to speak. Their acceptance was gentle and warm, like sunlight spreading slowly over a cold morning. Ilera turned back to the river one last time. Her reflection appeared on the bright surface, whole and steady. For the first time in years, she didn't feel disconnected from it. The woman in the water felt like her. No younger versions, no tears, no shadows hiding behind her eyes. Just Ilera. Her reflection moved with her as she straightened her posture. She looked peaceful, almost serene. Ilera took a slow breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. She turned away from the river and began walking back toward the village, not to escape the past, but to step into a future no longer shaped by fear or guilt. The river flowed quietly behind her, carrying the last of the wildflowers downstream. And for the first time in a long time, Ilera felt whole.